I'm Leslie Dannon Rosenthal from Greater Metro West New Jersey, and I'm chair of the Network of Independent Communities. Welcome to the session, the Post-COVID Climate Challenge. Thank you for joining us today. Recordings of this session and all the other workshops will be available after the GA ends. I hope you're planning to join us tonight at 7 for the Federation Together plenary. I suspect I'm not the only one in this virtual room who worries about climate change and makes personal efforts to fight it, like recycling enthusiastically. As a former environmental attorney, I know it can feel futile to do all of this when the larger world seems headed in the wrong direction. But as we can learn from today's conversation, our organizations can be agents of change in this work. The panelists gathered here have been focused on building comprehensive local responses that engage as many Jewish organizations as possible, that weave as many people as possible together in this work. They know that together, local Jewish organizations and each of us can make a critical difference. Our panelists will describe these local responses, lessons learned, and actions each of us can take. They have a framework for activating people towards protecting the climate that will reframe how we see Tu B'Shvat. It can't just be a minor holiday, as well as the Jewish calendar more broadly, in order to radically expand a Jewish communal response to climate change. I'm pleased to welcome our speakers for this workshop, Jakir Manella, CEO of the Pearlstone Retreat Center, Alon Tal, Professor of Public Policy at Tel Aviv University, Anna Duby, leader of Hazon's Jewish Youth Climate Movement, Sue Salinger, Executive Director of Akar Farm, Yoshi Silverstein, Founder and Executive Director of the Mitsui Collective, Carrie Alterman, Program Director for Jewish Life at the William Davidson Foundation, and Nigel Savage, President and CEO of Hazon, who will moderate. Nigel, the floor is yours.
Leslie, hi, thank you so much for that introduction. A big thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everybody for joining us. I want to say a big thank you to Beth Cousins and Mark Gervis and Eric Fingerhut at JFNA, and Tess Hartwell and Abby Levine as well for helping to make this session happen. This is a historically important session. I don't know how long GAs have been in existence, but this is the first session in the history of the GA focused on the climate crisis. And I think that's significant because it's incredibly important for us going forwards. In the session I was in just before, talking about collaboration, Barry Feinstein from the Jim Joseph Foundation was saying, one of the lessons of COVID needs to be not merely reacting to that which has been, but actually using this to leverage and to plan for the future. And I think that's a good frame for this session, which we've called the post-COVID climate challenge. This year has been an incredibly reactive year. This year has been about COVID. It has been about swiveling. For synagogues, it was, how do we do services for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? For Jewish day schools, it has been, oh my gosh, how do we do this? What do we do? But as 2021 starts, we will be in a circumstance in which we're in a new year, a new financial year. We'll be in a new 4-year cycle in American political life. A new president inaugurated on January the 20th. And gradually, COVID will be in control. There will be a vaccine or we will adjust to it. And as all of this happens, our time horizons will again lengthen. And across the world, across the West, and across the Jewish community, we will once again start to think about longer term issues. As we do that, there will literally be no more important issue than the climate crisis. And even amidst COVID, it has become absolutely clear this year, with extreme heat in Israel, with the fires in California, that climate change is no longer something happening down the line or happening over there to other people. It's now actually biting in significance and impacting all of us. On the one hand, therefore, we can't ignore it. But on the other hand, we each of us feel overwhelmed as individuals, as institutions, as Jewish communal leaders. At Hazon, it has become clearer and clearer for us as an organization that not merely that Hazon's task, but to some extent, the task of the Jewish community is to effect systematic change over the next 10 years, so that within a decade, to step into any Jewish institution, it will be absolutely clear that to be Jewish is to work for a more sustainable world for everybody. Increasingly, as an organization, we see it as being analogous to the work of Jewish feminists over 5 or 6 or 7 decades. People said, why can't a girl have a bat mitzvah? Why shouldn't a woman be a rabbi? Why should any woman be paid less than a man? And it took a lot of work, a lot of people, a lot of organizations, both within and beyond the Jewish community, but now 50 or 60 or 70 years later, to walk into any Jewish institution as a girl or a boy or anybody else is different than it was then. Well, in relationship to climate, we don't have decades, we have years, but we have to effect that change. And there is no one way to do it, which is how we now come to this panel and to our different panelists. Because there is literally no one-size-all solution, because we, each of us, based on who we are, what our institution is, what our platform is, need gradually to step forward. We've brought together a remarkable group of people who at different levels, in different ways, in different places, and with different backgrounds, have each at some level said, I may not be able to complete this task, but neither can I desist from it. And so we've asked each of them initially to speak for 5 minutes or so, to say a little word about who they each are, how they come to this work and what they've been doing. And then we really want to open the floor to Q&A from everybody. I want first of all to turn to Dr. Alon Tal, who's a dear friend, who's one of the, truthfully, he's a modest person, but I will say one of the great Jewish environmentalists of this era, the founder of the Aravat Institute for Environmental Studies, the founder of the Israel Union for Environmental Defense. In a parallel universe, he should have been, but I hope at some point will be either Director General of Israel's Ministry of the Environment or Chairman of JNF and Kakao. But Alon joins us live now from Israel. And Alon, I'd like to hand to you first, to just remind us all why this issue is so critically important, and then to give a perspective from Israel. Dr. Alon Tal.
Well, thanks so much. Nigel, I often describe myself as an activist trapped in the body of an academic. And so I am a professor at Tel Aviv University, but I'm strongly involved in Israel's environmental movement. I think if we want to look to the future, it's always good to start with the past and how fortuitous or how appropriate it is that we are having this session the day after synagogues around the world read Parashat Noach, the story of the flood. Now, we often associate the flood with issues associated with biodiversity, and that's also something that makes sense. But when we think about it, some of the commentators take a look at the generation of Noah and pretty much attribute their obtuse, misguided moral efforts to the fact that they were part of the Iron Age, which somehow or other was really created the transition between a very sort of hunter-gatherer society to the agricultural civilization, which produced the huge numbers that we have today, which eventually led to the industrial and carbon-intensive society. But while they had this amazing technological evolution, their ethical standards and way of living did not evolve in parallel. And that's why they had that tremendous loss of legitimacy that ended in the flood. And one could almost do fast forward 200,000 years, if you want to, from that transition to say that we too have been part for the last 100 years of phenomenal technological development, but somehow ethically we haven't managed to catch up. And climate change is a way, and sadly, of the planet reminding us that we are pushing it beyond its abilities. Now, coming from Israel, I would say that in a sense, these are the worst of times, but they also could be the best of times. So when I say that it's the worst of times in Israel, indeed, this summer had the hottest days ever. We crossed for the first time, really, the 50-degree Celsius mark. I don't know what that is, 125 or something. We're talking about basically temperatures in which it is impossible to survive. We saw for the first time Jerusalem had its hottest night ever. And people, who usually could go out in sweaters when I was in law school in Jerusalem as a young man, now have to sit and sweat in the evenings because the temperatures are really changing. This year in Israel, we had massive floods and tragic deaths from people who were trapped in neighborhoods that didn't have the proper drainage infrastructure. And we've seen a rise, of course, in the intensity of forest fires, although nothing like California, certainly things that cause us scare. So there's plenty of reasons to be concerned. Now, I was very lucky this year to be asked to be the scientific advisor to the state comptroller. Israel has a whole office set up to review the integrity of government ministries' activities. And this year's major report is going to be, how is the Israeli government meeting the challenge of the climate crisis? And it's an amazing opportunity to see exactly how much we're doing and how much we're not doing. And so in some areas, we really need to do much, much better. But I would say this, that Israel, for the first time, went to Paris in 2015. And unlike other countries, you may know one, where Israel did not back out of the agreement and has no issue with the pressing and real reality of climate change. Science totally informs our decisions in this area. Now, we made some promises in Paris, which we took a long time to start realizing, but this year, for the first time, Israel has made a commitment to 30% renewable energy by the year 2030, which is a big, big step for us, considering that Israel is an energy island. We don't have anybody from whom we can import electricity. And solar energy does have this unique characteristic that it doesn't necessarily provide you electricity at night. So we're really having to look to a whole new way of storing energy, and we look to maybe a new fleet of electric cars. So there is some very, very exciting things happening here in terms of the way that government ministries are beginning to speak out. And we're starting to reach a consensus. And the most important thing about the Israeli climate debate is that we are not paralyzed by a right-left stalemate. We don't have that tragic, polarization between political forces. Everybody, I think, is with the program in terms of our need to change the way we live and act so that we can leave our children a planet with a stable climate. I want to just conclude by suggesting some specifics, which I would hope that the Jewish world could embrace. And what's neat about climate change as an environmental issue, it is the one issue where we all miss together. In other words, I could talk about biodiversity in Israel, but at the end of the day, that has a lot to do with our own regulation and how we zone and how we care about the natural world. The Jewish world can support us and support environmental organizations, but it's on us. But climate change, we all contribute. And so the first thing I think we need to realize is that as Jews, we could be doing more. I think we need to create a situation where it is expected that anytime there's a Jewish mission to Israel, and God willing, soon the flights will return and COVID will pass into the history books and we will be able to host all of our brethren and sisters again. But at that point, we really should have a solid program of offsetting so that nobody who flies to Israel contributes to the overall carbon burden. The second thing I think that Israel needs to be doing on behalf of the Jewish people is really to take the idiosyncratic and I think very, very special lessons we've learned in terms of tree planting in a dryland environment and apply that to the world. There is huge areas in the Sahel where there is massive desertification, loss of vegetation, and a tremendous need for afforestation and mostly reforestation. They don't seem to know how to do that. But in Israel, which has managed to make forests blossom in as little as 250 and 300 millimeters of rain, we somehow have developed this crazy technology, which we need to share with the world, because really sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere through tree planting needs to be part of the global solution. The third thing I would suggest that we need to do as a Jewish world is really together redefine our relationship to meat. And if anybody has not read the book by Jonathan Safran Foer, We Are the Weather, we'll go out and buy it now, because this really, to me, is the definitive statement. It has been translated into Hebrew, and it's an example of how we in Israel can learn from the Jewish community in the world. But I think in today's world, the notion that we have to have a chicken on a Friday night is antiquated, and it's against what the Almighty would expect of us. Because when the planet had maybe 1 or 2 billion people, we could have the luxury of eating meat. But right now, we should, only kind of meat we should be eating is Beyond and Impossible burgers. So those are things that I would really suggest of all of you, and anybody who can put solar panels on the roof, get with it. Certainly every synagogue needs to be energy and carbon neutral. So those are just some specifics we need to do to take this tremendous shared commitment to save the planet on behalf of God, who gave us this little corner of the world to take care of and do better. And surely we can do better. I salute all the people who organized this session, and thank you for letting me be part of it.
Alon, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And we'll come back to you a bit later in Q&A. You made reference, as it were, to our children. And I'm really happy next to turn to Anna Dubey. We have all of us been inspired and provoked by Greta Thunberg in the last 2 or 3 years. At Chazon, we have helped to nurture this year a Jewish youth climate movement. And there are a growing number of Jewish teenagers across certainly North America who have started to connect with each other because they care very, very deeply indeed about this issue. And truthfully, because L'Shem Shemayim, in a good way, they want, I think, to rattle the cage. They want to challenge Jewish institutions and Jewish leaders as the next generation. And as a community, we're always interested in the next generation and leadership, to say that we need to be doing more. So Anna's one of the leaders of the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. She's a teenager, she's in high school. And Anna, I'm happy and honored now to hand over to you, and I'd love you to say a couple of words about why you care about this issue, some of what you have been up to, and what you would want to say to a group of Jewish leaders across the North American Jewish community. Anna, welcome, and you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be engaging in this conversation with all of you. So I'm Anna, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior in high school. I go to a small pluralistic Jewish day school in New York City. And so I got into this work because in 2017, I actually remember the exact day, I read the headline of a news article stating that we had only 10 years to mitigate the most catastrophic effects of climate change. And I remember thinking that 10 years, I'm only going to be 25 10 years from now. And that's when I realized that no matter what I do, climate change will have a massive impact on the rest of my life, starting even in my young adulthood, even when I'm 25 or even younger than that. So until that point, I had a very compartmentalized view of climate change, like I think a lot of teens and other people unfortunately still have. It was the idea that some people care about architecture, some people care about tap dancing, and some people care about the environment. But reading that article was when I had the realization that climate change is something that will impact all of us, whether we choose to care about it or not. So that reasoning is part of what led me to the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, which was founded by Chazon in early 2020. JYCM is the first Jewish youth-led movement that's designed to advocate for climate action. Some of our goals are to use existing Jewish values as a motivation to fight the climate crisis, to increase Jewish engagement with the environment as a whole, and to give Jewish youth a voice in the broader climate movement. We're also currently expanding and launching Futso, or chapters, all around the country. So if you are a teenager or you know teenagers between 7th and 12th grade who might be interested in joining, please reach out to us so that you can join or start a Futso in your region. So as a teenager and as a member of JYCM, I think that one primary action Jewish institutions need to take is education. At a lot of Jewish day schools, camps, Hebrew schools, there's no climate education at all or inadequate climate education. For example, at my Jewish day school, there are optional classes you can take or extracurriculars you can get involved in if you want to be one of those people who cares about the environment. But again, that reinforces the idea that the environment is something you can choose to care about or to not care about. So in my opinion, every Jewish day school or Hebrew school, or really every Jewish institution that works with youth, needs to institute a mandatory climate education curriculum. And it's not just about the education itself, it's also about how they educate, what they include in that education. So I often see Jewish institutions, if they embrace any environmentalism or environmental education, getting hung up on individual action. So maybe they'll hold a park cleanup or teach congregants how to recycle, but it often stops there. And there's no discussion of what people can do beyond that. And I think that's really damaging in a lot of ways because it leaves people feeling satisfied that they've done their part when there's still much more they could be doing. So Jewish institutions need to have accurate climate education that depicts the true causes of climate change and the truth about what we can do to fight it on a broader scale. So this education needs to include systemic change, the systemic change necessary for us to fight the crisis. It needs to talk about the systems of oppression that perpetuate the crisis. And one more really important point it needs to talk about is environmental racism. I recently heard a powerful sermon delivered by Rabbi Angela Buchdahl about the role of race in the Jewish community. And she pointed out that about 1 in 7 Jews in America are Jews of color. Yet in a lot of Jewish communities, there's still this idea that there's a Jewish look, that the Jewish community is not as racially diverse as it obviously is. So education in schools or institutions working with Jewish youth about environmental racism will have a double effect of first, creating a more accepting Jewish community for all Jews, and second, awakening us to the immediate dangers affecting not just the rest of the world, not just the people over there, but the people in our community. So along with the education I feel is crucial provided by adults to youth, there should also be opportunities for youth to kind of reverse the positions and become the advocates for climate justice. Youth are already leading the charge against climate change worldwide, and Jewish institutions need to give youth the opportunity to stand up and be the leaders in the fight that will define their lives. So maybe that means inviting young people to give Torahs about the environment in synagogues, or having Jewish youth groups organize climate strikes or text study sessions about the environment in relation to Jewish values, or even having a teenager join the board of your institution to provide the crucial youth perspective on the issue. I believe that giving Jewish youth a voice will empower them to take the lead on combating climate change in the present, and then also teach them to be the leaders that the world will need in the coming decades. So in summary, I feel that we really need full and accurate climate education that does not center around individual action within all Jewish institutions, and that all of these institutions need to center the voices of Jewish youth in their actions. So I think that all of this will go a long way towards reshaping the narrative that climate action is something you can choose to care or not care about, into the idea that climate action is for every single person who wants people my age to have a future.
Anna, thank you for that. That was appropriately, I think, challenging and should be, I think, provocative to all of us. And I thank you very, very much indeed for that. I think it's appropriate now to turn to Yoshi Silverstein. You were talking about environmental racism. You were talking about Jewish people of color. Yoshi was at Chazon for many years, led our Jaffe Fellowship, moved back in the last year or two to Cleveland, and is growing his Mitsui collective, and has been one of the key leaders in this country on both of those issues. Yoshi, I'm really thrilled to welcome you to this panel and would love to invite you to say a little bit about your background in Mitsui and some of what you believe we can, could, or should be doing.
Okay, thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Alon and Anna, for starting us off. And yeah, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, but you very much teed me up for a lot of what I'm going to say. So thank you. So my name is Yoshi Silverstein. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a Chinese Ashkenazi American Jew. I currently live in Shaker Heights, right outside of the Cleveland proper, the city itself, which of course is part of the very purple Cuyahoga County, which every election cycle is a pivotal location. And I would be lying if I said that wasn't at least part of why we moved back here. It's also historically Mississauga and Erie lands, to give acknowledgement to the indigenous communities that have been here and been in relationship to these lands for a very long time. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, in a very small Jewish community. Spokane is nestled in the sort of rolling Palouse between sagebrush desert steppe to the west and the Northern Rocky Mountains to the east. The congregation that I grew up in was sort of radically inclusive before that was a trendy thing. I think maybe part of that being if you live in a place without very many Jews, you can't really afford to turn any of them away. Obviously, that's not the only reason, but it was something that was really foundational to my own certainly involvement in Jewish life and really set the stage for so many aspects of my work and my community engagement and just all these aspects of my identity. I also spent a lot of time in the mountains, hiking and skiing. Really was given the gift from my parents of developing that relationship. And also I was really engaged in what I now look back on and sort of group together as thinking about all these opportunities for embodied learning. So in addition to hiking and skiing and nature connection, also, played music from a really young age, both sort of like this, in the solo sense and also in, orchestra and chamber music. So that sort of balance between the solo or individual and the collective aspects of creativity and community building. I was a martial artist throughout starting off as a young age and was really involved with that. And then particularly through my Jewish community, both in Spokane and then ultimately more largely through community prayer and ritual. So I think, just as I was thinking about some of these different aspects that led me to, the work that I do and who I am, I also think about the educational pathway and sort of what laid the foundation for my own identity, as well as the approaches I think about for education. I went to a Montessori preschool that was literally housed in an arboretum. And so when it was recess time, we would just go out into the arboretum and play in the trees. So it's probably not such a surprise from that lens that I became, a Jewish nature educator when I got older. And then even in elementary school, I continued on in a Montessori that was really unique in that it was integrated inside of a public elementary school. So sort of a balance of these different things. And, we would go on these annual community campouts for several days at the end of the year. And every time we would go on those, our teachers would carve out time for us to learn about Native American history. We'd learn throughout the entire year, but we'd use in these campouts, we'd actually connect with, local active tribal leaders and educators in the different areas that we would go to. And so I didn't even realize that that was an unusual thing to learn in elementary school until, high school. I'd have conversations with people that I would just have no idea what I was talking about. And I thought this was just sort of essential common, curriculum from elementary school, and it really wasn't. So I think all this really brings perspective to me, sort of living at the margins as a Chinese Jew, really at the edge of both social and ecological biomes, but also recognizing the vibrancy that we see in ecological edges. Like, this is really where so much happens, right? It's really this amazing place of activeness. So I spent most of my early career in the secular, and then particularly in the Jewish world, Jaffe, Jewish outdoor food farming and environmental education. And last February, as I sort of wrapped up my time at Chazon, I founded Mitsui Collective. Our mission is to build resilient community through embodied Jewish practice and racial equity. We're based locally here in Cleveland, and we're also doing programs and involved in partnership work on a larger, broader scale. And so the core of this work for us is really to think about, particularly in the context of knowing that the climate is already changing, it's already having impacts, as Nigel and others mentioned, and that's only going to continue over the next several decades. So really the context is thinking about, in the face of a changing climate, as well as rising racism and xenophobia and anti-Semitism, how do we really build resiliency, and how do we build it across multiple scales? So for the individual, for families, for communities, for ecosystems, and also thinking about through different modalities of resiliency. So certainly physical resiliency, but also mental and emotional and spiritual. Thinking about economic resiliency, right? And thinking about the ways in which, hopefully we're going to really weather and maybe even thrive in the face of these changes. So the core framing questions for Mitsui Collective within that are the embodied practice: how do we experience Judaism through our bodies? And the racial equity is really thinking about how is our experience of Judaism and Jewish community impacted by the bodies that we're in, and sort of all of the identities that go along with that, sort of with a core focus on racial identity, but also really thinking expansively about that. And so we do this through a few different aspects of the work. We do this through our community building lens. We're really thinking about how do we center those whose identities have historically been marginalized, right, who have been pushed to the margins in Jewish community. Like I said, that particularly focus on racial identity and sort of the somatic experiences and aspects of that, and the ways that we need to also think about healing, and sort of like post-trauma somatic work within that context. And of course, it also includes other marginalized identities. How do we really put those identities at the center of the work, through who's involved, who's included, the teachers that we bring in, the sources that we use, all of those things? How do we put those at the center and then build the community out from there, as opposed to the inverse that has historically happened, in which those are all pushed to the margins? And then our specific pedagogy, we're really focused on embodied practice. And broadly, that includes, there are these sort of tools and technologies that have been part of Jewish tradition for thousands of years, really from the start. So thinking about prayer and ritual and nature connection, and these aspects that are really core to what we who we are, to food. I always like to say, like, if eating food for you is not an embodied experience, then sorry, but I think you're really doing it wrong. So it's all of those things, and then particularly the sort of creative edge of where we're really doing some research and really pushing some things and getting into practice and thought practice in partnership with folks, is thinking about Jewish movement practice, like physical movement practice and wellness practices. And really thinking, what does a Jewish movement practice that sort of builds resiliency of body and spirit look like, and how do we develop communities of practice around those things, in ways that allow us to express our fullest divine selves, if we're all B'Tselem Elohim, our fullest divine selves through creative movement, through feeling comfortable and at home living in and utilizing our bodies, and then ultimately comfortable and at home in community. So, just for in my last 30 seconds or however long, in terms of thinking about what are the things I recommend that folks are really thinking about in Jewish community and Jewish institutional life. I think it's one, thinking what are the utilitarian as well as the spiritual economic aspects of resiliency that we really need to be developing, the things that we need to do starting yesterday to prepare ourselves for what's coming. we need to be thinking at least as much about cultural and spiritual adaptation, as well as the sort of technical aspects. We need to recognize that environmental exploitation and racial exploitation stem from the same root cause, and we cannot fully address either of those things in isolation. And then really thinking, how do we get into relationship, both internally in the Jewish community? How do we think about who do we turn to and learn from and draw wisdom from? And of course, more broadly and externally, how do we get into greater proximity to develop genuine relationship and sort of use social connection as that connective fabric that I think allows us to pull on all of these different threads in like a truly, ecological, interconnected sense.
Yoshi, thank you very, very much indeed for that. And just before I call on Carrie, I want to point out to everybody the Q&A. Many of us may be familiar with chat in Zoom, but the JFNA GA team want us to be using Q&A. And I actually want to encourage people to start to put questions in that. We're going to come to that after we have heard from our next three panelists. Yoshi, I want to thank you for that. And I want to say that it's actually now particularly appropriate that we turn to Carrie Alterman. Carrie's the Carrie is the Senior Program Officer, Jewish Program Officer at the William Davidson Foundation. And many of the things that Yoshi was talking about now are real issues in the city of Detroit. What is the relationship between the Jewish community and the wider community, the city and the suburbs? And a key frame also, I think, for this GA is the relationship between federations, foundations, and nonprofits, which is evolving. Alon began by saying this is a moment of great challenge, but also a moment that gives him hope. And there are things that are happening in Detroit, truthfully, that give me hope. And the William Davidson Foundation is at the center of many of those things. So I'm very happy now, Carrie, to hand over to you to say a little bit about the Davidson Foundation and what you have been up to some extent with Chazon in Detroit.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. As Nigel said, I'm Carrie Alterman, Program Director for Jewish Life at the William Davidson Foundation here outside of Detroit, Michigan. And I really appreciate, Nigel, the invitation to speak with everybody today and to be a part of such a wonderful panel and this virtual GA. So I've spent the past 25 years working in the Detroit Jewish community. And many years ago, when I was an outreach professional at the Federation, one of my projects was creating new affinity groups. And in around 1997, we started Teva to work together as a Jewish community on shared issues of concern and interest on the environment. Because I cared then and I care now about the world we're leaving our children and our obligations and opportunities in leaving this earth better than we have found it. And of course, the knowledge that each of our actions, as you heard from our panelists already, both large and small, can make that difference. Together with wonderful lay leaders, I remember writing a Tu B'Shvat Seder, which I hope I can find in the archives at the Detroit Federation. And we had various lectures and gatherings that were trying to really build community, allowing us to be more educated and active through that Jewish lens. I mean, we hosted Adam Wehrback, who at that point was the youngest person ever elected as president of the Sierra Club. We learned all about impact from him. It was really motivating and wonderful. But at the end of the day, we didn't really get the traction we needed to actively make a difference in the Detroit Jewish community. And Teva eventually merged into what was then Kojal and remained a small Detroit entity for a few years, but kind of petered out in time. So I've been with the foundation now for almost 5 years. And just before I joined, the board made a commitment to bring Chazon to Detroit. Their reasoning then and our reasoning since was mostly based around the concept of building an opt-out community, a place where young adults, no matter their area of interest and their multiple identities, could find a home in the Jewish community. We believed and continue to be assured by numbers and quality of program that emerging adults cared deeply about the issues that Chazon champions. But we've also learned something more interesting. Chazon doesn't just appeal to our goal demographic of millennials and Gen Z, it really appeals to the community as a whole. In fact, unlike Teva, Chazon is not a fringe or an outgrowth of the Jewish community, it's become the center of the community. So Jews of all backgrounds, beliefs, and ages have found that home. And As you know, Yoshi, it's great to hear you talk about Cleveland because, like Cleveland, Detroit's an old school, pretty conservative, small C Jewish community. But in just a few short years, with dedicated partnerships through the Federation and other traditional organizations, we've seen Hazon become so central. They bridge the gap, as Nigel was saying, between city and suburbs, affiliated and unaffiliated, Jewish, not Jewish, Jew adjacent. We now are starting to realize and understand that doing this work is an incredibly efficient way to accomplish multiple goods at the same time. Hazon's work moves the foundation's goal forward in strengthening both the Detroit Jewish community and the fabric of life in Detroit in general. I would call that a true win-win. So none of this, I do have to say, none of it would be possible without the vision of Nigel and the work initially of Sue Salinger, who I'm pleased to sit on this panel with, and now Ren Hack and their amazing teams. We couldn't imagine a community now without Hazon partnering with agencies throughout this community. Prior to the pandemic, Hazon had the secret sauce for gathering Detroit Jews, something that really hadn't been happening for a pretty significant period of time. They were bringing together 5,000 people each summer at the Jewish Food Festival. They were helping to lead certified Jewish communal buildings. Everyone began seeing Hazon and environmental justice and climate awareness as a need to have, not a nice to have. And since then, they've made it their business to find new ways to bridge community, assist those in need, while representing the Detroit Jewish community and our desire to make the world a better place. So while I'm here representing the foundation, it is important to note that we don't fund environmental causes or climate change action or ecological programs. We fund programs that build Jewish community, that strengthen the fabric of peoplehood, bring together diverse members of the Jewish world. And that's really what Hazon does, and why I'm proud to be here representing a sponsor and one of the funders for Hazon. That's really what we want the rest of the world to see, that this work can be done in a unifying way across denominations and generations, and it can and should unite us rather than divide us any further. So with that, I say thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Nigel, and I look forward to the rest of our afternoon together.
Carrie, thank you. Thank you so much. What you said just now was so generous. And I want to really genuinely put it back. I think it has become clearer and clearer to all of us these last 5 or 10 years that we are part of cultural and organizational ecosystems. And it's not foundations or federations or nonprofits. It's really genuinely all of us working together and starting to animate and catalyze the Jewish community as part of the larger fabric of this country and of the world, so that together we actually, as it were, punch above our weight. That's why I'm also exceptionally happy now to go over to Yakir Manella at Pearlstone in Baltimore. And again, I think it's particularly significant against the background of the JFNA and the GA. What has happened in Detroit really, 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 really genuinely can and should be a role model for communities all over this country. The same is absolutely true in Baltimore, where Yakir Manella is one of the key Jewish environmental leaders of this generation. He runs the Pearlstone Center, which is growing under his leadership, has literally grown every single year in the range of its programs, in the impact that it has. And it's, of course, an agency of the Associated, and the work that Yakir has done and that Pearlstone has accomplished is to some extent unintertwinable from the impact and the role of the Associated in Baltimore. We, a few minutes ago, heard from Anna as one of the leaders of the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. I want to simply say that when I first met Yakir, he was probably not that much older than Anna is today. And Yakir, you've been an extraordinary leader from then until now, and I'm very honored and delighted to hand over to you to tell us a bit about Pearlstone and what you have been up to.
Thank you so much, Nigel. It is an honor to be here with you, with everyone on the call, and amazing panelists. So deeply resonate with what everyone said, and very much see so much admiration and respect for you, Anna, and for everyone that's leading from the front lines in the youth today. As Nigel said, I am the CEO of Pearlstone, the Pearlstone Center just outside of Baltimore. I came to this work really coming up through the field, the Jewish environmental education field, the Jaffe world. Met Nigel many years ago as I started that journey. It has been an amazing adventure, and particularly now, in a session like this, in times like these, really understanding that our work is holy and sacred, and that we all have a really solemn and sacred and joyous opportunity to create a bright future. And I really want to thank everyone for coming to this session, to making this the conversation, the important conversation it is. I'm also a board member for Chazon, and really, really honored to support that amazing organization and the work they do. And as Nigel said, I'm also really proud to be a leader of an agency of the Associated, the Baltimore Jewish Community Federation. And as Nigel said, none of the work that we have been able to do at Pearlstone as a Jewish educational entity and as a climate change activist entity would be possible without the amazing partnership and support of the Associated. I'm really, really grateful for that. We are a 180-acre Jewish immersion and engagement campus. We've been the Associated acquired the land about 60 years ago. It is land that, according to our research, was inhabited by Piscataway and Susquehannock tribes years ago, and we have built a partnership with the Baltimore American Indian Center and do more and more education around Indigenous peoples as we learn our history and take it seriously. And we impact over 20,000 people of all walks of life every year, every Jewish denomination, many different Christian and Muslim and Buddhist groups, and a lot of different secular groups come to us as well for immersive experiences. And we also run a really wide variety of Jaffe programs, from day camp and overnight camp, congregational Hebrew School on the Farm programs, day school programs like Teva. And even during this pandemic, we actually are running an outdoor school called Farm and Forest School, that in the midst of all this challenge, we have over 100 kids coming from many different public schools and private schools to be on the farm, in the forest, inspired Jewishly during this time. We also really try to walk the walk. We have a stewardship team that runs our 10-acre certified organic farm. We're doing a lot of reforestation work on our 180 acres, meadow restoration, stream restoration. And we also have a community sustainability initiative that for the past 10 years has really worked to empower and mobilize the Baltimore Jewish community to reduce our carbon footprint and really respond to the climate crisis and the environmental values that our tradition holds so dear. We have a green loan fund that over the last 6 years has put out over 17 loans totaling almost $750,000 that every year cumulatively saves our community $250,000 every year in utility bills and reduces our carbon footprint in really significant ways. So a green loan fund has been a really impactful initiative that we've taken. And in fact, at this point, we're now opening it up not just to Jewish organizations, certainly not, it's never been just Federation agencies, it's always been to all Jewish organizations. And at this point, we're opening to all faith-based organizations in the Baltimore area. We also have a bunch of greening work we're doing on site. We're about to install solar panels on all of our rooftops. We are looking to do a larger solar field on our campus. We have a initiative that for just regular community members, not institutions, who want to support solar power but don't have a site where they can put solar panels on their rooftops. You can buy into a partnership we have with a local company where you can save money on your utility bill and support renewable energy. And in partnership with the Associated, to their great credit, we have organized our Federation community to make a 20-year commitment to a solar developer where we are creating a 12-acre solar farm that will provide 50% of the energy used by all the Associated Federation buildings from renewable energy. The solar farm would not have existed without this 20-year commitment. We at Pearlstone have committed 75% of our energy to come from that solar farm, and that plus the on-site work that we're doing will get us to be 100% renewable energy, which really is, I think, the model for all of us as we move forward. And lastly, we do a lot of advocacy work in partnership with the Baltimore Jewish Council on environmental issues, on climate change and renewable energy standards issues in Annapolis, so that folks understand this is a Jewish issue. The Jews care about this and are going to speak up and support active change on the legislative level to address the climate crisis. And I would say to everyone that, to try to make change on this, the first step is really to speak up. Things started very small here, but really once people speak up, maybe not originally imagining that this might be a Jewish issue, it actually is something that a lot of Jews care about. And once starting small, it can become a community-wide priority through education, through continuing to talk about it, through action steps. I think some of the three biggest action steps on my radar are green buildings. What would it look like for federations to establish a LEED standard that is going to be the standard for every new facility that is created or renovated? What would it look like for us to have priorities in local food to reduce food transportation miles across communities across the country? And what would it look like to set a standard for renewable energy being a part of what it means to be Jewish in the 21st century, to have an institutional renewable energy standard? And lastly, to really invest in advocacy, to speak up on behalf of our Jewish communities, that this is a Jewish issue. If we care about Israel, if we care about our institutions, if we care about creation and we take the Torah teaching seriously, if we care about our children or being relevant to the next generation, that living Judaism, what we talk about at Pearlstone, that it's not just words on a page or teachings that we hear, it's that we live it physically, it's a sensory experience, and that for Judaism to be vibrant and vital in the 21st century, it must speak to the issues that we face as human beings, as Americans, as Jews on planet Earth. And that can be hopeful, that can be joyous, that can be filled with love and justice and sustainability. And I'm so honored to see this powerful group of people taking these steps forward, and really excited to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, Keir, thank you. Thank you so much for that. One of the things that is really phenomenal about this panel is literally every single one of you has personally inspired me. And from every single one of you, I have personally learned. And I love seeing the layers of this build upon itself to give us a picture of what actually is and should be possible within Jewish life. I'm very happy to turn to Sue Salinger, definitely last but not least. We first met Sue when she was a leader in the Boulder Jewish community. She then moved to Detroit and led Chazon's work on the ground there exceptionally successfully over a multi-year period. She then moved back to Denver. She has family there, and led work both directly for Chazon, but now leads Ikar Farm, the Jewish urban farm in Denver. And Sue, truthfully, I think of you as somebody who takes almost literally every single thread that we have talked about in the conversation thus far and is effecting change at so many different levels. I want to invite you to say a little word about Ikar, about the Chazon seal, and about the way that you see institutions as being able to effect change. Sue Salinger.
Nigel, thank you so much. It really is it's such an honor to be here. Thank you for thinking of me. To be on this panel with everyone doing this work is just the medicine that I personally, and I hope everyone on this call needs at this time. It's been a crazy, crazy year. My pronouns are she, I use she and her pronouns, and I'm on Cherokee, Sioux, and Arapaho land right now here in Denver, Colorado. I went to summer camp at Tamarack in Detroit, which is where I made a connection to the land. I grew up in the burbs, and Tamarack was a hardcore nature. As camp does, as Jewish camp does for so many of us, it made that connection for me. I'm an educator and former television producer executive, and I worked for a long time on independent media environmental shows. Sometime during that time, I went back to Naropa. I went back to school in my 40s. Because I thought doing stories about climate change wasn't as important as doing direct work. And I studied with Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, who gave me the assignment, as he gave so many people that came into his circle, of fixing the climate from a Jewish community change perspective, to really reach into our deep well of tradition and take on the responsibility of making sure we have a planet that we can live on and that our children can live on. I want to, when the title of this, what's the post-COVID climate challenge? What's the pre-COVID climate challenge? Our peoplehood climate challenge story isn't always directly apparent. We don't always teach it, but what we got out of Egypt, that is the story of the failure and reboot of human society that over tax the land that it was on through bad agricultural practices. You know, when those first canals were in the Fertile Crescent were overused, the earth and the water became over-salinized and famine ensued. People migrated out of great famine and hunger. Our people, we're told in our beginning story that we went down to Egypt, and over the course of time, we and other people had to turn over our money, our lands, and our own freedom, our own right to self-determination in order to be able to eat and survive. And then when we got out of that situation and entered the land and got our instructions, our traditional wisdom instructions for how we should reset up a society, we're told you have to, all the agricultural laws, you know, came to bear. I mean, the first book of the Mishnah is dealing with seeds and agriculture. It's foremost in who we are is creating a world where everybody can eat. We don't own the land. We have to let the land rest. We have to let everyone who's hungry, the immigrants, widows, orphans, the poor, eat food as part of a just society. And if we're a just society, somehow we have a right relationship with rain, and the rain will come in its time. And we're told, why are we told to do this? We're told to do this because, remember, last time you guys tried agricultural work, you ended up enslaved. So take care of it. So that, to me, is the task of the Jewish people right now. How do we set up a right relationship so that our society as a whole can flourish, even in spite of rapid change that we are largely responsible for? The COVID climate challenge here in Denver, as you know, we're in the middle of the worst fires in our history in Estes Park. Thank God it's snowing right now, kind of blizzarding out the window. Super important that the snow is here, but we're in a mega, along with the West, we are in a multi-year mega drought. And it doesn't seem like we're going to get out of it anytime soon. During COVID, Icar is a 2-acre farm. We're a mini Pearlstone. When I grow up, I hope I can be as successful as Yakir has been with his project. We are a farm that serves the Jewish community. During COVID, we joined with the Federation and with many of the congregations that we work with to try to make sure everyone has enough to eat, to try to make sure we could grow extra food. Normally, we teach, we educate, we have 4,000 people a year, mostly school kids. But all congregations come out to celebrate holidays. I mean, almost all of our holidays are agriculturally based. Shabbat is gorgeous on a farm. In fact, if you're studying the rules of Shabbat, they really become apparent on the farm because so much of it is agriculturally based. What is coming out of COVID for the Jewish community and the wider community is a vastly strengthened safety net. We've been taking meetings. We've been one of the only Jewish groups on these city and statewide calls all year from the hunger relief community, which is multi-institutional, it's cross-sector, it's been amazing to see everyone that we would have wanted to be around the table for climate work, for hunger work, for poverty work. Everyone's around the table now, and we've built deep relationships to keep people eating and safe and housed this year during this time. So I'm hoping that vastly strengthened safety net is a model for how we can proceed. I mean, we know that here in Colorado, one of the things we learned on those calls this year is that there's no longer enough water. Within 5 years, there won't be enough water for commercial agriculture for the southern half of Colorado. And within 10 years, they're anticipating that there won't be enough water for all of Colorado to grow commercial agriculture. So there's real change ahead of us and real challenge for the Jewish community. Post-COVID, the problematic to me is, what do we do as Jewish communities to build resilience into the system so that we can respond as Jews and as a Jewish community to these fires, these droughts, the corresponding hunger, suffering, and economic instability? We need to partner as much as we can with everyone that we can, including the Jewish organizations. The seal of sustainability is a mechanism to do that. I couldn't be a larger fan of this program. In Detroit, we went from 0 organizations to all the Jewish organizations within 4 years. It's a simple program, and just that it exists is makes change possible. There's a position that's held by the Seal of Sustainability, Hazone, ICAR, Pearlstone, any of our groups, Mitsui, any of our groups that are doing this work. The Seal of Sustainability is you sign up as an organization, you get a person to talk to who is your coach, who can let you know who can work with you wherever you are at in your organizational challenges, lifespan, life, wherever you are, to address the issues that are most important to people today, to address food and food systems. You can do food policies, energy, what to do with our buildings, water use. What I want to say about the Seal of Sustainability is that it's a tool of engagement for individuals. And we know that when enough individuals work on an issue like this, they change their organization and change the organizational policy. And once there's enough organizations, what we saw in Detroit was that what Carrie and what Nigel said seems really true. If you're involved with any Jewish organization in Detroit, you know that there's a garden at every school. You know that there's a food festival bringing together the food movement and the food justice people and the environmental justice people every year, that if you're Jewish, this is what you do now. At ICAR, what we did with Hazone in Denver through the Seal of Sustainability, and now with ICAR, we have 7 organizations were signed up before COVID, and we'll have 20 by this January, who are all working wherever they're at to engage their members, educate their folks, and to change how they do business. The thing that I would suggest that you do back wherever you are, is take a look at the vast amount of resources that are held by the Jewish community. We have land, we have buildings, we've got spaces, and ask yourself, for the next crisis that comes around, if it's going to be over 100 degrees for 3 months in your city, what's going to be needed? How can we serve the larger community and the Jewish community as we're going through? What are the resources and the roles that you don't have yet on site at your congregation that you need? And how can you begin a process like the Seal of Sustainability to be able to answer those questions? I'm going to finish by quoting my favorite Jewish poet, Allen Ginsberg, who said, "While I'm here, I'll do the work." And what's the work? To ease the pain of living. Everything else, drunk and dumb show. We got to do this work together, folks. This is really the time. Thanks, Nigel.
Sue, thank you for that. Thank you to everybody. First of all, I really want to encourage all of our panelists, if there are relevant links or information in follow-up, feel free now to send it to all panelists and attendees. I want to encourage, we have more than 100 participants. If you have questions, to start to put them in the Q&A. Lawrence Casimir asked, how can Israeli organizations raise funds around climate change? And one of the things I wanted to say on that is I want to turn that question on its head. And I want to say that to anybody in this call who has a leadership role in a federation or a foundation or a funder, part of what you can do is to begin next year or the year after, start from your first clean year, the year in which all of your monies are not committed, and year by year, start to allocate at least some money to all of your grantees, to any organization that you are supporting, and say, in addition to the support that we are giving you, here is at least a little bit of extra money to enable and encourage you to begin the process of driving systemic organizational change around environmental sustainability. One of the questions from Daniel Pledgefek, and Daniel, I apologize for mangling your name horrifically, but he said, and it's obviously a key question, what can federations do? And Yakir already gave, I thought, some answers to that. Sue has as well, but I really want to just open briefly to panelists, and particularly if there's anything that hasn't been said. If there is something that you believe that a Jewish federation can or should do around these issues, go ahead and either speak up or possibly put something in the chat to all panelists and attendees. And I'm not quite sure how I call upon people right now, but I think I've got Alon wanted to say something. Alon, you're up.
Here's a 4-point plan for Jewish federations that I would endorse. First of all, take solar energy seriously. Just like the Amish have barn raisings, why don't you organize solar panel roof raisings? requires a lot of strength, but there's no reason you should have money in an endowment today when a return on a solar investment is 5-year payoff. That's close to 20% interest. We should all be getting our money out of bank accounts and into solar energy. Second of all, declare your federation to be vegetarian and start Jewish vegetarian cooking. This has to be a new commitment at a community level. Third of all, you should have outreach in the overall community. So the interfaith meeting of candidates in the local and state elections about their environmental platforms should be based at the Federation, because this should be a core Jewish issue, in my opinion. And go camping and get your people outdoors. Let's beat this sterility of some of the trappings of synagogue life and get out the way the Baal Shem Tov taught us to under the stars. My 4-point plan.
I want to add one thing, by the way, that Alon didn't say, which is anybody who is involved in leadership in an American Jewish community in this country, whose organization is involved in Israel or strengthening the Israel diaspora relationship in any way, you should be connecting to the Israeli environmental movement. Underneath the radar, the Israeli environmental movement is one of the great success stories of the last 10, 15 years. It's not only bridging difference within Israel, it's building relationships between Israelis and Palestinians. If you want to, going back to what Carrie said earlier on, if you want to do, as it were, one thing that is capable of accomplishing multiple goods, starting to engage with, to learn from, and ultimately to support the Israeli environmental movement is a phenomenal way to make a difference actually in the Middle East and to strengthen your own community. Anybody else on the panel, just put your head up and I'll demute you, or you'll demute yourself if there's something you want to say to a Federation leader. Yes, Sue.
What I'd like to say is, if you have a JCRC, make sure that somebody's representing climate issues on the JCRC. Here in Denver, couldn't be more progressive. Nobody, it's not that we have the same 4 issues we've had for 50 years. Time to add climate to the agenda.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm going to hear Yakir and Anna, and then I want to encourage our participants, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A.
I will just say that I've learned this framework from Chazon: education, action, and advocacy, and really opening up the space for wherever the education happens, but really making it a community conversation is critical. The action steps can look different in different communities. I certainly agree with Alon's approach, and I think not just solar panels, but there are ways, as Baltimore is, to invest in solar in a very large scale without necessarily putting solar panels on your buildings. So looking at renewable energy in a real way. And then, as Sue just said, advocacy is critical. We have to step up.
Anna, thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And then one more thing, a little bit more general, that I would emphasize is just the idea that it's important to dream big. Like we're seeing right now, all of the changes that we can accomplish. We're seeing like youth leading entire political campaigns for candidates and getting those candidates elected. So just don't get stuck on what you can and can't do, and instead focus on just dreaming big and making substantial change.
Yosh, you're up.
First, I want to say it's an honor to be on this panel in general, and particularly because folks are touching on so many things where it's like, yes, amen, and then I don't have to mention them because they've already, so like amen to everything that's already been said. I want to answer this and also in part answer one of the other questions, which was really tapping into this question of relationship in Judaism to land, and particularly thinking about what it means to be a people who has this historical indigenous relationship to our, what we call our ancestral homeland of in ancient Israel, the land of Judea. And so I think 2 things. I think first of all, there's been a tremendous amount of work at Chazon and Wilderness Torah, at Pearlstone, of really thinking about what does it mean to really tap into and sort of reinvigorate our indigenous roots as a people, and to think about what that means, certainly in a relationship to Israel, but also what it means in a relationship to the lands that we're here in diaspora and really thinking about what that looks like. And so I would encourage in this realm of like climate, preparedness and resiliency for federation, so to think about federations, what are the ways that you can, leverage all the different resources and networks and connectivity to really think like, what does it mean to develop an indigenously minded ecological relationship to land in Jewish community? So that's the internal focus, and to think about, like what are the skills we need of growing food, right? And of having social connection and all those different things. The other aspect though, and I think that if we are going to, on the one hand, really live into and sort of reclaim or reinvigorate our own sort of indigenous connection to one land, we also have, like, it's disingenuous, and pun sort of intended, to not consider the ability of folks who are indigenous, certainly to this land and to other lands, and like, what does it mean for us as Jewish people and institutions and communities to be in relationship to those folks, right? And so this is sort of really bringing in the environmental justice, aspect of things. And so I think we really need to think about what are the ways, like I said, that we get into relationship. And I think, Yakira, I loved what you said. It's been really wonderful to see the ways in which Pearlstone has really pushed this forward. And I know that's it's like relatively new in your work. And so, kavod and kudos to you all in that. And so I think thinking about that as a model. And one thing I really want to put out into the ether is that we are in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, right? So next year we'll be in the next Shemitah year. And Shemitah is all about our relationship as Jews to land, to ownership, to communal obligation, to like releasing debts, right? And so for us to think both what are the debts that we need to be released for ourselves, but also like to think about others, and like economic restitution and reparations, and really think like, what does that mean? What does it mean for all of the land that is under Jewish institutional ownership, that was originally land that other folks were in relationship to? And how do we really relate to that in a different way? And I just want to say, it doesn't necessarily mean that like we will just cede that land and it'll just get taken back over. Like maybe some of it, I don't think that would be a bad thing, but to think about what are the different forms that we get into relationship with local groups, so they know what folks are really yearning for and needing. Are there land taxes that we start to incorporate that sort of acknowledge this like core relationship of ourselves as Jews with this indigenous connection to the folks that are indigenous to the land we're in diaspora in? Like, I think we really need to ask all of those questions. And I think the next Shemitah year is like the perfect opportunity to really like, prepare for leading up, and then to dig into and really start to activate some different responses in this question.
Thank you for that. I want to add further, it's not merely that I agree with everything that has just been said, but I want to say to everybody here who's involved in any Jewish organization, who sits on any board, who has any leadership role, the calendar is central to Jewish life. Hanukkah is different from Pesach. Shabbat is different from Tuesday. Whatever your flavor of Jewishness is, it makes no sense that in our organizational calendars, we don't register Shemitah. We have from now until September the 6th next year, which is the start of the next Shemitah year, to start to plan for how our organizations use that year. And we have from now until September of 2022, which is the end of the Shemitah year and the start of the next 7-year cycle in Jewish life, to start to figure out how over that 7-year period to end by having your Jewish organization have committed to multi-year sustainability, to pick up all of the things that have been said, because we can't do it overnight, but over 7 years, what energy do we use? What food do we serve? What about the interfaith piece? What about education? What about advocacy? I want to share, and I mean this as a form of giving kavod and giving honor, the antecedents of this session more than a year ago was Eric Fingerhut, after he had become head of JFNA, agreeing that JFNA would start to convene federation leaders to start to begin a conversation as to how by the end of the Shemitah year, we could have at least a series of federations that would have those multi-year plans. Some of that was at least temporarily derailed by COVID, but part of what this session is about is starting to put that work back on track. I want to give kavod to Rabbi Fred Sherlinder-Dubb. Chazon began with a bike ride across America. We were partly inspired by Fred, who now 25 years ago, before he went to rabbinical school, walked across America to raise environmental awareness. And he has put in the chat here, and rightly, a reminder that there are so many people doing this work that people can reach out to, including Interfaith Power and Light, Dayenu, Kojal, JEI, Grow Torah, and I would add also Urban Adama, Wilderness Torah, and a series of people. So thank you, Fred, to that. I want to go to a question that somebody asked here, and I've just lost it. Maybe somebody else answered it. Somebody asked the question, I thought was a really excellent question. And they said, if people, oh, let me just find it. I'm so sorry. Hold on a minute. Oh, hold on. Yeah, Jenny Gates Beckman said, do you have any suggestions for how to get folks on board in communities who may have significantly less progressive organizations and institutions Jewishly? Oh, that was a really, really good question. I think, Carrie, if I may, I want to ask you to take a first stab at it in terms of like engaging people who are not necessarily themselves or their organizations completely fired up by this. What would you say to those institutions or their leaders, or to somebody in a community that had fewer resources?
Well, Nigel, that wasn't the question I was going to answer, but I will comment on that really briefly. But I did want to say, with regard to Shmitan, with regard to the cycle of Jewish life, there is, I'm going to mangle the quote from Bill Gates, but people overestimate what they can do in 2 years and underestimate what they can do in 10. And we have this opportunity for that 7-year window to really think now about, Anna started this saying what happened in when she read something in 2017, and that was already 3 years ago. Well, here we have this refresh, and it would be 10 years from when Anna started having that conversation and getting engaged in this movement that we can make a huge difference as a Jewish community and really buckle down and find those ways. I also, the piece around, I think that one of the challenges for a very long time with climate change and the environmental movement has been it is often seen as hand in hand with the progressive movement. And I think when we're able to take the partisanship out of all of this, and we're able to look at this through a lens of, as Rabbi Fred Daub was saying, who, if I'm correct, if it's the same Fred Daub, is from Detroit. I haven't seen him in probably 30 years, but I would say that there's opportunity, especially in the interfaith world, to build those bridges through community that takes out all of the partisan piece of it and talks about obligation and opportunity and bridge building. And that's how I think that you don't sidestep that piece of it, but when you only look at it through the lens of politics, I think that you lose a huge amount of people who care deeply. I think when you drive through neighborhoods that are traditionally red or traditionally blue, and I appreciated Yoshi's piece around purple Cuyahoga County, because, I'm here in purple state Michigan as well. But it's not like you see less recycling bins in certain areas and more recycling bins in other areas. People are committed to it, despite whatever their political allegiances may be. So I think we need to make that effort to take it out of the partisan lens and really make it a part of every conversation. The last thing, there was this really interesting question in the chat, and I don't know if it's Robert Rich from Detroit or if it's a different Robert Rich. We're really uncreative with many Jewish names, right? But he asked about, what do we do about the incredible amount of Jewish real estate, especially in older communities, that need to be updated and perhaps consolidated? And how do we have that conversation to assure that, first of all, that they're up to the environmental standards they should be up to, and that we're really being aware of the impact that we have with too much real estate and too many buildings. And I think that one of the takeaways from the pandemic may be the opportunity for federations to really start looking at that and talking about how to consolidate and right size and recognize. It is very hard. There's an emotional connection to so many buildings, as all of us have, and I'm among those. But this is an opportunity for us to really look at it through so many different lenses and to make a difference. Sue can talk a little bit more about it, as can Nigel, I appreciated you talking about the solar panels, because I know that the Detroit Hazon has done a huge push to get agencies to start installing them and see them as both a tax for tax reasons, for environmental reasons, for it's the right thing to do, it saves on their energy bills, all the reasons that make sense. It's harder in places like Detroit when Tess from the production team was helping me and I was saying my light, like, we don't always have a ton of sunlight in Michigan. So we have to be aware of that. But places where it's so, you guys get much more sun than we do, we have more opportunity.
Nigel?
Thank you.
Can I just
Yeah, Lon.
respond briefly to Rabbi Dobbs' comment? First of all, Fred's voice has been for so many years such an important and consistent and thoughtful expression of the Jewish environmental commitment. So you always want to listen to what he has to say, but I think he's really right about the interfaith stuff. Just for everybody who's wondering, last night we watched on Netflix the Trial of the Chicago 7, which is the #5 watched Netflix show in Israel, because we're all locked in watching that. And it struck me just how overrepresented Jews are within that anti-war movement, just like Jews were overrepresented in the civil rights movement. And I know in my work how overrepresented they are in the climate justice movement and in the environmental movement. So we do great as individuals, but we don't do as well collectively. So I think maybe one of the things, the challenges we could do, there's no reason why the leading institutions within a certain, I don't know, ecumenical community couldn't be the Jewish voices for the environment and really try to spearhead the spiritual community together, because I think individually we're there, but I think institutionally we haven't really taken it on ourselves, and we could.
I want to add something to that. So COP26 is the UN climate conference. It was delayed for a year because of COVID. It's going to happen in November of 2021 in Glasgow in Scotland. And kind of remarkably, and we discovered only this recently when we were asked to coordinate a Jewish presence there, kind of unbelievably, the world's religions are going to be invited to develop 7-year plans around climate. And it's ironic because, of course, we as an organization, but truthfully, many people in this session have been thinking about Shemitah as a frame. And it turns out that by this time next year, or a little bit later, we are going to have a whole chunk of the world's religions starting to think about 7-year frames for environmental change in relationship to COP26. The Pope is, I think, planning some kind of gathering at the Vatican in May of next year. And the Pope did a remarkable encyclical, Laudato Si, which was calling upon the world's billion Catholics to take the environmental crisis seriously. But I think that the Catholic Church's, as it were, self-critique of that was, we put out a great encyclical, but what is happening on the ground? Now, 5 years on, we need to bring people together again and say, what are we going to do? And of course, that I think speaks to us Jewishly as well, because we're also good at declaring things and writing things and saying things. And I think that we're at a pivot moment going into next year. I think this panel has been a capsule of that in so many ways, that things are now happening, but we, each of us, need not to be deterred by feeling that we don't have enough money, or we don't have enough time, or we don't have enough knowledge, and simply dive in. And within each of our institutions say, okay, enough already. I'm going to have my board make a commitment. We are going to found a task force. We're going to begin a process. You can start in 17 different places. You can do 17 different things, but let's get cracking. Karen Elam, a big question. I'm just going to ask a couple of people to say something on this very briefly. Karen in Rochester, and one of the leaders there, talking about Black Lives Matter and the connections between Black Lives Matter, environmental racism, environmental justice. Yoshi, I think, truthfully spoke somewhat about this earlier on, but I want to add, if anybody has really something specifically that you would say to Karen, as a leader in Rochester, in a city in which there is a relatively strong organized Jewish community, a small city, absolutely not unique in the United States in having not merely a strong Black Lives Matter movement, but the need for one because of significant racism on the ground. What would you say to Karen as a leader in Rochester in wanting to draw connection, build relationship around environmental issues on the one side and Black Lives Matter on the other? Yes, Sue.
You know, my response would be based on my experience in Detroit. and sort of referencing the question of what if we're too conservative, what if the area that we're in is too socially conservative to take on these so-called progressive issues. I really think that it's about personal relationships and personal experience. When you get together, particularly for work that Hazon does over food and food pathways, you can hear people's stories and go to people's neighborhoods. And the human experience is universal and suffering is suffering. So I think that my advice would be for Rochester is put together a multicultural gathering, share different types of foods, and let the people in your areas working on these issues talk about the issues. You can't do Black Lives Matter support in a vacuum. You have to do it in relationship to where you are with real people.
Thank you. Yakir, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you. I so deeply agree with what Sue shared. And one of my main teachers who has taught me so much on diversity, equity, inclusion, and doing an anti-racism training with us in a couple of weeks is Yavila McCoy, CEO of Dimensions Educational Consulting. And she uses the phrase, that the work progresses at the pace of relationship. I think as Sue just shared, like what are the relationships and how do we build those in authentic, genuine ways and grow from there. We haven't talked about the pandemic much at all during the session because it's really about how we use this as a time to mobilize and learn from this model, I believe. Pearlstone has turned into a crisis response entity. We've provided 25,000 meals, more than that, to people in need in the city, and really we're able to do that because of the relationships that we've built over time. And those same relationships are now informing our advocacy work that's going to focus more exclusively on environmental justice than in the past. And really seeing the synergy of those things is really important to us. And so I think it's both a relationship thing, an organizational partnership thing, and then really from a authentic ground up way, stepping into an advocacy role when appropriate, when possible.
Thanks. And Yosh, I think you want to say something.
Yeah. So I think one, and sounds like Karen, you definitely have an understanding of this, but I think one, just making sure that folks are just up to speed on what is environmental racism and really understanding the ways that environmental impacts are spread disproportionately amongst different communities. We certainly have seen this within COVID, the way that Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately impacted because of COVID, which is because of existing environmental racism that has exacerbated all sorts of different issues and sort of increased vulnerability to things like pandemic and COVID, and certainly climate change. So that's point number one. And point number two that I want to just make sure is really emphasized is that when we're talking about Black lives mattering and being important and being holy, that we're also recognizing that there are Black Jewish people, right? And that we specifically, so when we say Black Lives Matter, we're also saying that Jewish Black lives matter. And so we're not only talking about, it's not an us and them, right? It's an us and us. And if we really care about everyone who is in the Jewish community, that we also need to be considering, like, who are the Black and Brown folks that are within Jewish community? Do we really care about, Klal Yisrael, like the entirety of Israel, or only a specific slice of those folks? So just want to really put that out there. And the last thing is, because you mentioned Yavila, who is also a colleague and mentor, has so much tremendous wisdom. Yavila gave the keynote to the Jaffe Network gathering of 2019. And it is an incredibly powerful talk. The video is available on someone's Facebook page. So there you go, Nigel, and plug in your stuff, even though I'm not formally working for you anymore. But it is a tremendously powerful speech. And she really talks about so many aspects of like this question. And so I really encourage folks to, put it on in the background, and give it a listen.
Thank you. I want to offer a couple of last frames to all of our participants. At the start of next year, Chazon is going to be launching a Brit Chazon for individuals, an individual commitment, and it involves simply three things that we all should be doing. Firstly, making some further change in our own behavior. Not, as Anna rightly said at the start, not because that's in any way sufficient, but because it's simply the minimum that we each need to do in order to look ourselves in the mirror and to have any standing to say anything to anybody else. Secondly, we need to give time and money to organizations that are making a difference. And thirdly, we need to raise our voice, which panelists have said, and raising our voice can mean it in an advocacy sense, it can mean it in a public space sense, but it could also be raising our voice within any institution of which we are part and saying this institution, this synagogue, this day school, this camp, this federation, as well as anything else we are doing, we now must take the climate crisis seriously, and we have to start a process to drive systemic change. And that's the second tool, the Chazon Seal of Sustainability. As Yakir said, it's about education and action and advocacy, the individual, the institution, and the wider community. Education is learning the causes and consequences of our behaviors. Action is actually making changes. Advocacy is speaking up within a wider space. The heart of the Chazon Seal going forwards is for an institution simply to make a commitment to multi-year change. It's what we learned in Pirkei Avot 2,000 years ago. You are not required to complete the task, but neither may you desist from it. And so at this point, every Jewish institution needs to say, we commit to a multi-year process of change. We're not committing what that will look like. We're not committing an infinite amount of money, but we are simply saying we are now going to start to gather people together. We're going to learn, we will take our time, we will figure it out, but year by year, we will start to effect change. And I want to end by coming back to the calendar. The new president will be inaugurated on January the 21st, 2021. We don't know who that person will be. If it's Donald Trump, we will know that Donald Trump is president for the next 4 years. If it's Joe Biden, almost certainly there'll be a presidential speech, which will center around the climate crisis and a Green New Deal. And 7 days later, it's Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat this year is January the 28th and 9th. And one of the things that we would say to anybody on this panel or anybody watching or listening to it is plan on doing something for Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is not just fruit and nuts. It's not just for kids. Plan on doing something as an organization with other organizations, physically or virtually, and raise the question, what does it mean to be Jewish in the year 2021 in relationship to the environment? What are the things that we need to learn? What are the things that we need to do? It's the start of a new 4-year cycle. Let's invite our mayor. Let's invite our Congress people. Let's invite our elected officials. And let's begin the 4-year period and ultimately the 9-year period by starting to go from Tu B'Shvat to Earth Day on April 22nd to the start of the Shemitah year in September of 2021. And let's all of us intend that our federation, our synagogue, our day school, our camp, by September of 2022, will have some process to pick up many, if not all, of the things that have been said by our panelists this evening. Engaging our teenagers and our young people, our federation leaders, our foundation leaders, our activists, connecting with Israel, connecting with people of color, involving leadership from different places. And let me therefore finally thank every single one of our panelists. Every one of you is an inspiration to me, really genuinely. I say that really, really seriously. And a particular thank you to JFNA and especially to Beth Cousins. It's a big deal that JFNA has done this. It's actually genuinely a historic moment. May this be the beginning of a systemic move towards creating a healthier and a more sustainable Jewish community and a more sustainable and equitable and just world for everybody. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.